Well, thank you, Diana, Lydia, Catherine, and Stephen. Um, no, this is really great and rather inspiring. Um, and I think, well, we should sit down and think about this later about, where we go with this. I think the idea of an Indigenous working group is a good idea. But I also think, and I hope you might get some inspiration from Bernita's talk about working and developing specialized vocabularies. and one of the things is, though it isn't completely obvious in SNAC, it has been designed from the very beginning to be multilingual, so the ability to accommodate say indigenous names for places or subjects or what have you is entirely supportable, and so part of the challenge there would be so the technology is not so much an obstacle there. I think the obstacle there is more on the social side and getting organized and so on and so forth, to have people to develop the vocabularies and etc. But just judging by the response to the call for participation in this, it looks like you'd have you would not have a shortage of to use the word Bernita used as dignified, you wouldn't have a shortage of workers. So, I believe at this point we are going to have just a broad discussion. I don't know who is still available from the earlier discussions. I think Bernita is still here, and I know that Susan Brown had to leave, but Allison might have been able to endure to this point. But the sort of overall theme of the afternoon was ethical description on one hand and representative descriptions, which was put in the plural for a particular reason. And so over to Susan Pyzynski, who I think is prepared to moderate a discussion. I think we'll use chat maybe to initiate things, but I think it would probably be okay if people just want to have a conversation.
Absolutely. So people could either put a question in chat and also, encourage just asking a question, or I also would encourage any of the speakers, if they have questions for each other, because there were a lot of obviously common themes among your presentations. So I'd like to throw that open to you too, to ask each other questions. You always have that moment of silence as people gather thoughts and think about it.
So at this point, we have 53 people.
It's the end of the day.
So, yeah. Well, it's a long day, and it started. It's ebbed and flowed over the course of the day. People have other obligations and whatnot. But you have a question, Worthy?
Oh, I was going to ask Diana about looking forward to the editathon, but I was going to ask about the offensive materials. So I'm kind of familiar with archaeology, and so the notion of displaying anything that would have human remains in it, sometimes even referencing that they have human remains, is something you want to be very careful with, not to inadvertently expose people to it without their permission and so forth. In terms of kind of more archival materials, I don't know if I'm drawing too fine a line between kind of archaeological kind of things versus archival materials. What sort of things come in that category of possibly verboten or not appropriate?
Yeah, I can certainly
photograph.
start, and then Lydia and Stephen, feel free to jump in. I mean, there are lots of different kinds of things, especially things like dances, songs, basically anything ceremonial that was documented. You know, there were a lot of anthropologists around in pueblos with cameras that shouldn't have been there. There's a long history of people, writing down the nature of ceremonial activities or other kinds of sacred activity, and those end up in, somebody's field diary, or those end up, or even like writing a letter about it to somebody. So those kinds of materials, things like medicinal formulas. Anything that's sort of a medicine, or again, can be kind of ceremonial. I've also heard about examples of drawings that actually depict sacred beings that should not be seen. So for any of those kinds of materials, a lot of the same things apply as you would have in museum collections and belongings, that, they maybe shouldn't be seen at all, or if they should be, only someone who's part of that community, and maybe there's a gender limitation, or a time of year limitation, or, there's a lot of different ways that those things are culturally appropriate to be seen. And so, yeah, so in the archival field, there's a lot, but again, it's always like, it could be like the middle of a notebook in one box, in one huge collection. And so it's very hard sometimes to know if they're not very well described, what's there. Lydia and Stephen, other examples. I cover it.
Lydia, do you have anything to add to that?
So I think that just like in general, the way I like to think about it is any information that was taken from a tribal entity that was not, where they were not explicitly given permission to take that, counts. According to obviously like NAGPRA and stuff, there are 4 very concise definitions of materials and things that fall within that. But I would say that like any kind of material, information, etc., that was taken without permission.
Which is a lot of material, because there were a lot of collectors who weren't considering those ethical boundaries at all, or thinking about consent proactively at all.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was just going to say that's the last thing that Diana said, which we're not thinking about consent at all. Consent wasn't really part of the relation.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what's already been said regarding cultural sensitivity, but there's also other sensitivities that people need to keep in mind when they're actively making collections available. One of the things that that NARA recently released is the content warning for a lot of their collections that they might have that have whole legacy descriptions that are disparaging to source communities. And so for myself, I work in a healing organization dealing with a boarding school, U.S. Indian boarding schools who essentially stole children, and had this historical effort of reprogramming children to essentially hate their cultures. So now that's kind of really the apparatus that the boarding schools really served. But there's a lot of shame, and there's a lot of healing that is also associated with these collections. So when people are actively engaging with them, that can trigger certain emotions that can sort of add to the stressors of mental health that is currently somewhat commonplace in a lot of indigenous communities who experience boarding school traumas. So, you know, in terms of ethical stewardship, institutions have to start to think about these things. And I know that they have recently started to think about these things from that standpoint. So I've only really seen a handful of institutions who have actively drafted and who have circulated and published content warnings to address those kinds of concerns within their collections. That's another angle to it as well.
Well, and in fact, that's almost more relevant in the SNAC context to the extent that it might take you 2 or 3 steps to get to, say, a digitized image of something, but you can get right to the description. And so if there's inappropriate or racist or other kinds of material in there, that's going to be really difficult for people.
And I can see this applies also to the enslaved population, that there are sensitive things that need to be addressed or not included. But in terms of describing the individual, being able to reach back into historical records and to compile the identity or the existence of this individual, then there are times that that some of the sensitive material, which is descriptive, needs to be addressed in a sensitive manner. And so I think I can see where we have a lot of the same topics that are pulling us for the indigenous and the enslaved population. But at the same time, I feel that there is that need still to identify individuals in a sensitive manner.
Yeah, that one of the discussions we had within the enslaved description group had to do with the fact that in terms of vocabularies that we would list to be used in description, that you know, we wanted to make sure that those were well chosen and dignified and respectful. At the same time, when historically going through documents, you're going to find all kinds of offensive language. And in some ways, you don't want to erase that, because for researchers, having access to that can be an important part of discovery. At the same time, you don't want to dignify it and elevate it in a particular way. So we sort of wrestled with that tension between those two things. And yeah, I'm not, it's I think a balancing act. I mean, there is this sense of wanting to, you want to be respectful on one hand, and on the other, the fact that there was ugliness, you don't want to hide it, because that seems not the right thing to do either. So. I always become self-conscious if no one responds to what I said. Did I wander completely, off the path?
Daniel, you're out in left field again.
Yeah. But I did want to bring it up that it's this discussion, there's a tension that's constantly there trying to figure out how to grapple with this.
We have about 3 more minutes left on this afternoon session. So if there are other questions, let us know.
I think there are a couple, and one was from Diana to Benita about if there's been anything your group has desired to do that thus far in SNAC that you've not been able to do, accommodate, or find a workaround for.
Well, I think that we're gradually making progress. I think that a big issue will be one that I think John brought it up, is that it's overwhelming. The amount of content that needs to be addressed, the number of individuals, enslaved persons. And I think that SNAC, and this probably applies to the indigenous population also, that it would be helpful if SNAC can, and I did bring this up to Daniel at one point, that we had special portals or something that helped us to target what we were entering, to be able to target repetitions and different categories that are specific to what we are entering, so that we don't have to keep searching for the right terms and right groupings and whatnot. So I'll that maybe is where I'm going.
Bernita's wishes always make me a little nervous, because I immediately begin to think, okay, how could we accomplish that from a technical point of view? And then well, it's difficult. So it's, there are some ideas that are really good, but they may not be immediately doable. I think one of the key things to do is not to forget them, though.
Somehow I'm a constant little bee in your ears. So it won't be forgotten.
I set out to make you happy, Bernita, but the list of things I need to do seems to keep growing. So
we're adding more. So
yeah.
I think we need to the double team it.
Yeah. Well, that could be it. But I think Diana, that there's an overlap. There's things that we're doing sort of functionally and moving towards that support addressing some of the enslaved description, but can also be adapted to, I think, address some of the issues with respect to the indigenous descriptions as well. And a lot of this, a lot of it really ultimately is vocabularies of the words that you use. I mean, it's not all that, but that's a major piece. So we're at 5:01. We're losing people. We're down to 35 now. We could keep this going and see how long it takes to lose everybody, but I myself am kind of exhausted. So thanks, everybody.